Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Carrie.
Sonia, today we're going to be talking about fruity desserts.
Yeah, and I think in winter, it's not the first thing that comes to mind, or winter, early spring. You're not like fruit desserts. That's really a summertime thing. But I love this challenge of this topic because it made me realize actually how many desserts I do make with fruit year round. And you don't always need fresh fruit, frozen fruit, dried fruit. There's all this whole world of fruit that isn't about seasonal fruit.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the challenge of putting that into a box in the winter and coming up with things that feel bright and sunny and interesting and that aren't so heavy. I'm excited to talk about our ideas.
Yeah, and having just said the thing about seasonal fruit, I am actually going to start with a seasonal fruit. Because there is, even in the slower, months of the year, there still are things in season, and right now is still citrus season. And what I love about throughout citrus season is there's different kinds that emerge, and later in the season you can always seem to find blood oranges for, a month or 6 weeks. Like it's not a huge season, but there's this incredible blood orange almond ricotta cake that I made a few years ago that I found from Liz Pruitt, who created Tartine, the bakery.
Mm-hmm. A legend.
A
A
legend.
legendary baker, yes.
And she's actually famously gluten-free. Like I think after she became a baker, ended up with I don't know if she's
Celiac.
celiac. Yeah,
Okay.
she is. Maybe she's celiac, or maybe she's just gluten intolerant. In any event, she doesn't eat gluten. So this cake is sort of naturally gluten-free. She's not trying to swap anything. She's just making a cake she can eat. And so what's really amazing about this recipe is how stunning it looks when it's done. So it's a upside down cake. So you basically line your pan with sliced blood orange. Like you take the peel totally off the orange. So you have like a round peeled orange, and then you cut it into rounds. Does that make sense?
I think so. Almost like a supreme, but not supreming each of the segments. It's a
Exactly.
round.
It's a round without a
Yes.
peel.
Without a
And
peel.
yeah, and then you put that in the bottom of your pan. So at the end, you flip it over, and the top is just covered with these like sunshines of beautiful ombre orange, because
Oh,
usually it
wow.
comes in like, kind of different colors. And the batter isn't that complicated. It's a pretty straightforward cake. You're combining, some sugar and some ricotta and eggs. The only thing that's a little bit like technical in this recipe is she does ask you to beat your egg whites separately from your yolks. So you basically make a batter with the sugar and butter until light and fluffy. You're adding in the egg yolks one at a time. Then you're adding in some dry ingredients, which in her case is almond flour and cornmeal, which adds a really surprising texture.
Wow. Is it like it has probably a nice little crunch to it in
Yes,
a
it has
way?
a little
Yes.
bit of a crunch.
I love that.
Then you mix in ricotta and like some zest, some citrus zest, some citrus juice, and then you whip up these egg whites until they form soft peaks. And you can do this by hand, or you can do it with a handheld blender, or you can do it with a mixer. It just takes a little tiny longer by hand, but it's kind of like whipping cream. It's the same idea. You're just getting it thick, and then you fold that into that batter. So that's the only tricky step, I would say, but it's very, very doable. And I think it's pretty forgiving overall. If you're not perfect at folding egg whites, I wouldn't stress it. You bake it, for about 35 to 45 minutes. And then, you let it cool just slightly. And then the fun part again is flipping it over, putting it onto your plate or platter, and then having that beautiful array of blood orange slices. And it tastes just as good as it looks, which sometimes, like a really pretty cake, you're like, oh, it's so pretty. And then it kind of disappoints you.
Yeah, I love this idea of this stunning cake in the middle of winter, right? With like winter with what is winter fruit, a blood orange. And I imagine you could do this with like a regular orange, could you not?
Yes, you could absolutely do this with a regular orange, or a cara would be really nice here too.
Right, like a pink navel. So, but I think the idea of, I feel like every time I have opened up a blood orange, there are, to your point, like these different segments. Some are darker, some are lighter. And so this idea of like a very beautiful ombre cake in the middle of winter sounds so lovely. And, I know we generally don't use this word moist, but I imagine this is like a very rich and moist cake with all that ricotta and like the eggs and the whites and the yolks and right? It's a
It's a f
beautiful cake.
Oh, yeah, it's m almost veering into cheesecake territory,
Oh,
and I
wow.
just remembered I didn't actually peel my oranges. I sliced them, like, I just had this vision of, like, no, I didn't even peel them. I think she says you can leave the peels in, but if you don't like that kind of bitterness note, you could peel your orange. I love the versatility of that too. In any event, it's so like, to your point, in the winter to have a citrus cake, I always feel like adds a little brightness.
Absolutely. Well, my first idea is also a citrus. I actually have a lime tree in my backyard. And so I decided to make lime curd for the first time. And I was so surprised by how easy it was. Lime curd, it has like five ingredients: lime juice, sugar, butter and eggs, and it really veers into like a little bit more egg yolk than egg white. So you use three yolks and then two whole eggs, and you put your lime juice and your sugar and your butter in a pan, and you melt the butter, and you kind of make sure that you get the sugar. Sorry, uh, you make sure that you melt the sugar and you let that cool a little bit, and then you start to gently whisk that into your egg yolks and bring them up to temperature. And then you put that back in the pan and you cook it to about 160 degrees. And that's when it thickens. And I will say, like, the only fussy part is actually just not getting distracted by your phone or a conversation. And just, I just really paid attention and whisked it. And, I did use my thermometer so I could make sure that it was like up to the temperature that I wanted it to be. And at the end, you just add a little bit of lime zest. And I poured it into mason jars and stuck it in my fridge. And this is maybe an unexpected suggestion on how to use lime curd, but my son Mac, who's 8, really loves these dessert yogurts. They're called, like, it's like a full fat yogurt with like all these really great flavors, and the one he likes the most is key lime pie. And so it comes in a little container, and you can see that the lime curd is at the bottom, and then this whole milk, full fat yogurt, Greek yogurt, is on top. And then it comes with like this little topping. And so he eats these like very occasionally. And so this morning for breakfast, I gave him my own. So I mixed some lime curd into whole milk, full fat yogurt. And then I took a shortbread cookie, just like a store-bought shortbread cookie, and I crumbled it on top, and it was essentially the exact same thing.
I love that idea because I feel like you could make these and put them into little jars and have them as a dessert. And sometimes you don't want like a super heavy dessert at the end of a meal. And like a rich yogurt, like a I think you're talking about the Elenos brand of Greek
Yes,
yogurt
the
that makes
Elenos
that
brand,
lime
yes.
curd. They're based out of Seattle. Their yogurt tastes almost like ice cream in terms of its richness. It's
Oh,
very
yes.
fatty and very delicious. And if you can't find that brand, you could use any good quality whole milk, rich, thick Greek yogurt, or you could even use labna. I bet would be nice.
Yes.
But
Lob
right? That
that
thickness
thickness, yeah, the
and then a
thickness is.
crumbled cookie on top. It's a light dessert. It's unexpected.
Well, it actually reminds me of, my mom did cook for us a lot when, we ate a lot of home cooked meals when I was growing up. And my mom was always making these like puddings and jello desserts. And, she would make like a banana pudding or a chocolate pudding, and she would slice some bananas into it, or, she would slice some strawberries into it. And so this little bowl of, it sort of reminded me of what my mom used to do for us. It was like that little bit of sweetness at the end of your meal that's kind of gives you dessert, but like isn't too crazy. It's not like a cake. You didn't have to bake a cake or have a bowl of ice cream.
Yeah, and it also reminds me of this category of desserts called fool, which is pretty British. But if you take a lime curd and you whip some cream, and then you sort of swirl lime curd with whipped cream, and maybe you like add some berries on top or crumble more cookies, that's the same idea as what you're talking about. And the only part you had to really do is make this curd, which, as you described, is not that hard to make. I definitely love making citrus curds. If I had the beautiful citrus growing in my yard that you do, I would be making a lot more of them. I was wondering when you were talking about making curd, I feel like the last time I made it, the recipe told me to put it through a mesh strainer at the end. Do you not do that?
I didn't do that. No,
Oh,
because,
good.
what the actual piece that I forgot to do was add the lime zest, and
Uh-huh.
I had put it into all the jars, and then I realized I hadn't put the lime zest in, and so then I had to pour them back in and,
Mix it back up.
mix it back up and then put them back in the jars again, but I kind of like that it's a very, very tiny hint of texture, but I did double check it as a first lime curd maker. I double checked it for like any eggy pieces and there were none. Like if you really pay attention and don't let it sit on
Yeah.
the bottom of the pan. I mean, do you find that when you strain yours, you find little eggy pieces?
Sometimes. I think that's probably because 'cause I'm not so, meticulous when I'm whisking or something, but I feel like all these things, it's like you can make it as finessed or not finessed as you want. So, it isn't about perfection. I think it is just about the achieving, like, homemade lime curd, homemade lemon curd, and that's so fun. When I was thinking about what fruit recipes do I make, and especially ones that I make sort of year round or that don't depend on a seasonal fruit, I was thinking about clafoutis, which is a classic French sort of cake that usually uses cherries, but actually can use any fruit. And people make it with all kinds of fruit and all kinds of berries. And before I describe it, I have to say, last night, before we even talked, my mom out of nowhere sent me a picture that she had made raspberry clafoutis.
I love that.
Like, we've never talked about it. I
No.
don't know what encouraged her to make it. Maybe, like, she was reading my mind from afar, that clafoutis was on my mind, but it looked gorgeous, like, the picture she just took a cell phone snap at night, and it looks so beautiful, and it made me think the truth is berries are really around year-round. I mean, that is we can get them anytime we want, for better and worse, and even at the farmer's market in California, I know for sure you can get them there year-round.
You
Um
can, but you have to wait in line. There's a very long line.
Well, at least you have them. Here we don't have them at the farmer's market, but we do have them at the grocery store. And I also think there's ways to make clafoutis with frozen fruit. I've seen that done. In fact, I know it can be done because my friend Ethan this summer told me to save some of my sour cherries to make an Alice Waters sour cherry clafoutis recipe. And he said one important detail is that recipe calls for you to leave the pit inside the cherry.
What?
Like, it adds some kind of almond flavor to the overall clafoutis, and he swears by it, and I have the bag sitting in my freezer, so I probably have to make it after
Yeah,
we
you have
air
to
this
report back on
record
this.
this. But you can use a lot of different fruits. I would recommend raspberries, blackberries, a cherry is really good. You could do blueberry clafoutis, and all of those are so readily available and frozen and fresh. And essentially, you're making a crepe batter. It's flour, eggs, sugar. And I think the reason some people don't like clafoutis, like the taste, is it's kind of like almost like a dense pancake like
It's
consistency.
a little eggy. I mean, it's been a long time. I was definitely wooed by the idea of a clafoutis because it is really easy to put together and very forgiving. So that was a space that I ventured into many years ago when I was working as a personal chef. But I just remember being like, I don't know, it's a little too eggy for me. I think I need to revisit it though. I love the idea of a sour cherry clafoutis, and I actually have a can of sour cherries that I
Oh,
have in
that
my
could
pantry.
work.
That might
Yeah.
work. I wanna give it a try.
Yeah, I feel like you don't have to have cherries with the pits in them to try this
Right.
out or
Fair
to
enough.
even try I think you can try the Alice Waters recipe with the pitted cherries that you can find, whether they're jarred or frozen, defrosted. I would say if you're using frozen and defrosted to just like really let them drain well, I might even pat them dry a little because you don't want too wet a mixture
Right.
because that might add to like the sogginess of this clafoutis. I just think it's a romantic word. It's a romantic concept. It's so simple. You think of like every like chic French woman who just like whips up a
Whips up a clafoutis.
petite, right.
I love that.
So I almost like making it for that reason, even though, like to your point, I find it a tiny bit eggy. It's not my favorite all time dessert, but maybe we both need to just be tweaking our recipes and making it a little more often.
Well, one other thought that I just had as you were talking about the pits and the almond flavor is like, what if you just added like a tiny, tiny bit of almond extract? I
Oh,
mean,
definitely.
to me, that is, I always keep almond extract in my pantry and I'm always adding like a tiny bit. Like, you have to be very, very careful with how much you add. Like, I splash in my vanilla extract, but almond
Oh
is like,
no, it's
it's,
tiny, a drop. A
yes, because
quarter
otherwise,
teaspoon goes a long
yes,
way.
goes a very long way. So that's probably something I would do. I would
Yeah.
test that out that idea because classic cherry almond combination is a great one.
I'm pretty sure that I've made it with almond extract. And the other thing that is very common in a cherry clafoutis is to add cherry liqueur, which also adds that sort
Mm.
of like nutty almondy note.
I like that idea too. Well, Sonia, I have another idea that is very much inspired by you, and also kind of inspired by my mom too. So over the summer, my parents were here visiting, and we went to the farmer's market, we bought a bunch of peaches, I made a peach cake for my dad, but I had so many I was so wooed by these peaches. They were gorgeous and like burgundy and yellow and gold and so I took half of them and I cooked them for my dad and my mom and I froze the other half. And so I've had and I feel like you're always freezing fruit and keeping them in your chest freezer. And so what I realized is like, now I have all these peaches taking up space in my freezer in the middle of the winter and I was like, I should do something with those peaches. And so I took them out and I thawed them and the color is not the same, which was very disappointing to me. Um, but I like they sat there for a couple of days and I was like, I really need to do something. And I decided to make this easy peach jam. And it could not be simpler. You just cook the peaches with some lemon juice and some sugar. And because they were frozen, they needed a little bit more time, but they do come together. And then I just, poured them into mason jars and stuck them in my fridge. And then go ahead.
Well, well, are you simmering them on low and for how long does it so and do you chop your peaches? You kind of just throw them in, you throw in your sugar with the right measurements, you add your lemon juice. I always like when I'm making jam, I bring it up to like a kind of boil, then I lower the heat, but it happens pretty fast, right?
It happens pretty fast. I think it maybe took me 15 to 20 minutes, and it was like I was in a half caffeinated state on a Saturday morning. So, this was not like I had really had to pay attention. To answer your question, my peaches were in pretty big pieces when I froze them. We maybe cut each of the pieces in half, so they were like pretty big chunks, and I did use my potato masher to sort of mash them down a little bit
Right.
because I don't love like even when I'm thinking about toast with jam, I don't love like a big piece of fruit on there. And so I really did mash them down and that helped to like release more liquid and help them cook down a little bit. But it really took maybe 20 minutes total. And I did follow a recipe like, it was a couple cups of sugar, like a juice from one or two lemons. It was really very basic. But what I want to do with my peach jam is I really want to make these easy jam tarts. Sonia, the thing that I'm thinking about using my peach jam for is to make either a classic like jam tart, or I found these like thumbprint cookies that are shaped like hearts. And what it is a really classic sugar cookie dough. You can use any of, your favorite sugar cookie dough. You could even buy store-bought sugar cookie dough. And what she recommends that you do is you take a couple teaspoons and you roll it into a ball and place it on your baking sheet. And once you've rolled out all of your cookies, then you dip your pinky in a little bit of flour and you lay it down 2 times to make it in the shape of a heart. And so each of your little cookies has this imprint of a heart, and then you add a little bit of jam to each of these little hearts, and then you bake them off, and it's
So cute.
so cute. It feels like a really great thing to do with kids. It makes me wanna do that with Mac and see if I can get him to, help me make the heart shapes. But it's a great idea for, like, Valentine's Day or really, like, even just, like, a lunch or a fun dinner, you know?
It's a cute anytime idea because I've been recently thinking that I don't make enough thumbprint cookies. I love them,
I
and
love thumbprint
they're
cookies.
so good, and I feel like, "Why don't I make that more in my cookie rotation?" But the idea of giving someone a little heart thumbprint cookie any time of year, I don't think it has to be for a holiday. I think anyone would love that anytime. And to make your own jam, I think jam can be so intimidating to home cooks and has intimidated me at points in my life. But we're talking about not the kind of jam that you store on a shelf. This is the kind of jam that you store in your fridge. So you don't have to worry about like getting the perfect temperature or sanitizing and sterilizing your jars. I mean, you want clean jars, but it keeps in the fridge or freezer for a while.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I am very intimidated by making jam, but this was like it was so easy to use my frozen peaches for. You could certainly do this in the summer when you do have fresh peaches, but I didn't have time to do it at that time. And so I think what makes this idea of the thumbprint cookies really special is that like I did take the time to make the jam. I might just buy some sugar cookie dough and call it a day, but it's like a fun activity to do with, to do if you're a new baker too. Like you could also just buy sugar cookie dough and buy a really good preserve or jam and fill it with a store-bought jam as well.
Yeah, but and neither of these steps are that hard to take. Like definitely a sugar cookie dough is a pretty beginner level cookie to make. So
Agreed.
I love this idea. I have a super easy fruit dessert, and it's inspired by this chef that I worked on. I used to produce this show called Recipe Rehab. It was like a morning educational show, and it was sort of about healthy recipes. And Vicky Krinsky was one of the chefs on the show, and she also was a personal chef. And at the time, she was working full time as a personal chef to a very sort of like A-list celebrity. And she was often making things on the show that she would make for her clients. And she had the simplest dessert ever. I feel like she made this off camera just as a snack because sometimes she would do that. She would make her own meals or she would make snacks for the crew or for other people. She was just that kind of person, is that kind of person still. And she would take apples or pears and caramelize them in a little bit of coconut oil or butter or something simple in a pan and then serve that just with like a little dollop of Greek yogurt drizzled with honey or a little bit of whipped cream, to kind of balance out like it's a very simple, almost borderline healthy quote unquote dessert. But that it was so not like obviously this is not reinventing the wheel, but it was so, so delicious. And then there's a version of that that I started to do, which is a really quick caramelized spiced pear. Because apples, of course, are lovely, but I just think pears are also just something that makes a dessert feel like a little bit more special than an apple
Yeah,
sometimes.
there's something a little bit slightly elevated about a pear. I think they're just not as widely available as an apple.
Yeah, so I completely agree. And with this dish, you can either peel your pears or you can take the peel off and you cut them into like nice little wedges, a quarter. You don't want too thin or too thick of pieces. And then you get out your big cast iron skillet or heavy bottom skillet and you add some butter to the pan or vegan butter or coconut oil. Any of those will work. And then you add the sliced pears in a single layer and you don't want to crowd it too much. So this is like an easy recipe, but there's a little bit of technique. And then you cover it with a lid. And so you let those pears kind of cook and steam and get softened under the lid. And you're just steaming them and cooking them under the lid for 2 minutes. So pretty quick. And they'll start to brown. So you don't want the heat to be too high either, otherwise it will get too brown too fast. Then you take off the lid, and that's when you add your brown sugar, or you could use just maple syrup. That's what Vicky would do. And cinnamon. I feel like cinnamon is essential. It's what's going to make it feel like a dessert and not just like a weird topping. And then you and then you cook it for another couple of minutes just to get that like caramelized
So it's like
sugary
syrupy,
crust.
right? Yeah.
You squeeze lemon into the pan to deglaze it. And then, okay, it doesn't have to be dessert. This could go on top of oatmeal or yogurt or any kind of
Or in
breakfast
a
dish
bowl.
or in a bowl. But I really like it with like a little scoop of ice cream with another little sprinkle of cinnamon, and then just something like warm spiced pears with like a wonderful simple ice cream, I think is a really lovely dessert.
I mean, what you just described about getting a cast iron skillet and adding some butter, butter to it and all these pears, that's how my skillet apple pie starts. Is I brown apples in butter and then I end up putting, a pie crust on top after I've cooked all the apples. But, that is a real project. It takes so long to make enough apples to fill like a cast iron skillet and then put a pie crust on top of it and all that. And I do that once a year. But I love this idea because everyone has some kind of a skillet and you don't have to be really finicky about like, do you use butter? I love the idea of coconut oil. That's brilliant. And putting the lid on top just to soften the fruit. When I think of pears, I also think of like maybe a touch of cardamom. Like,
Oh,
would you add
yes,
that would be
yes.
so lovely.
You know,
And
thyme and pear is really nice too.
Thyme
A
and
couple of
pear.
fresh sprigs of thyme if you wanna go in that direction. But yes, I
Yeah.
think some kind of spice or herb, you want something to make it a little more exciting.
Yeah, and I love the idea of the maple syrup flavor too, like in that making it kind of like syrupy and again, I mean, I grew up eating like we had canned pears. That was like a dessert we would have on a weeknight. And you could probably brown like a canned pear a little bit and serve it warm with like a little bit of cardamom and cinnamon and a little bit of ice cream and like that would just be an elevated version of maybe something that you just have in your pantry.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a fresh pear. That's so
It
smart.
it doesn't. Well, my last idea is a no-bake cheesecake, but with a twist. So I found this really brilliant recipe from Serious Eats, and it's for like a truly no-bake cheesecake. If you really want your crust to be a little bit crunchier, you can definitely throw it in the oven for a few minutes, but it can be truly no bake. But there's this great twist that she adds to her sugar and she takes freeze dried berries. So, and you can do a mix, you could just do straight freeze dried raspberries or a mix of raspberries, blackberries, strawberries. That's what she uses. And she pulses that in the food processor and blends it together so that basically makes like a sugar flour mixture. It's like
She blends it with the sugar. So she takes
with
those berries with the sugar and then it's like
it helps
powdered fruit sugar.
It's powdered fruit sugar is exactly what it is, and then she folds that into this really very standard no-bake cheesecake mixture, and what I love they Serious Eats really took the time to make this really beautiful video, so I would recommend, we'll link the video. She shows how you beat the cream cheese together with this sugar that has the dried fruit in it, the freeze dried fruit in it, and you beat that together, and then once that's beaten together and really mixed well, then you switch to the whisk attachment and you add heavy cream, and that's what creates like the lightness. Like you sort of mix it up first, and then you create the lightness, and then you pour that into your crust. And the other like heavy recommendation is like making sure that you give it a good 6 to 8 hours in the fridge. So it actually makes it a really ideal, like, make ahead dessert.
So, yeah, typically a regular cheesecake has eggs and so in this no bake cheesecake, it's just cream cheese and heavy cream. Those are like the filling components and the sugar and fruit. So these are very simple ingredients that come together really quickly. I mean, yes, a handheld mixer or mixer is going to help you here or a food processor to pulse up all those berries. Although I would say you could crush them in a bag and not use a food processor if you need to. I've crushed freeze dried fruit before and that works fine. You might have little pieces of freeze dried fruit in there, but I think that could be kind of nice and be almost like confetti and wouldn't look bad. But I love this idea because I make a lot of no bake cheesecakes and I usually top them with fresh fruit. Like I love like a cherry topping or a mixed berry topping, but this idea to take freeze dried fruit and put it into the batter itself, and it sounds so easy. I feel like you could put it in your fridge as a standard sort of cheesecake shape in a cheesecake tin, But you could also, I feel like, individually portion these out in like little mason jars or little cups, and it could be really cute.
Yeah, by the way, that's a great idea. That's like a great additional thing you could do with it. You won't believe the color of it. It's like such a rich purple color. And Sonia, the other thing that I wanted to just bring into our conversation is that she also suggests adding a tiny bit of coriander to it, which I'm
Huh.
so curious. I would never think to pair coriander with mixed berries, but I'm going to try it just to see like what is that flavor because it sounds so interesting. It's like it reminds me of how you're always kind of mixing like, your pears with thyme and you know,
It's interesting, but I don't know that I would go to coriander. Like it reminds me of desserts with pink peppercorn, which I always think is kind of novel, but I don't love. And I also don't love every parent. Like I don't love lavender in desserts. That's not
I
my
don't
favorite.
either. Yes.
And coriander is one of my favorite spices. So I am curious because I understand how it could work, but it wouldn't. I would probably leave it out myself. So if you try it, definitely report back and let us know.
I'm definitely going to report back. I'm really excited to see the color of this cheesecake.
Yeah, it sounds stunning. I just have to say one last honorable mention in the fruit dessert category has to be the mango pie that Samin and Rishi talk about on their podcast, Home Cooking, their podcast, which they release like one episode a year. And we're all grateful. We're all so grateful for it because it's truly a delight. But this mango dessert has been on my list of desserts to try for a long time. I have not yet made it, but it just sounds so incredibly delicious. And I believe this was his mom's recipe or Rishi's mom's or dad's or family recipe. So it's not a tremendous amount of ingredients. It does involve gelatin, like a neutral gelatin powder, sugar, cream cheese, Cool Whip, mango puree, like a full pound, 16 ounces of mango puree. So then you're mixing a batter with those ingredients, and then it's a straightforward graham cracker crust. Does anything sound better than that?
No, it nothing sounds better than that except also, Salt and Straw they were inspired by this recipe and they made a mango ice cream in honor of this mango pie.
And I think they release it once a year seasonally too. I've never tried it, but
I've never tried
that
it, but
sounds very good
yes,
too.
sounds amazing. Well, this has been really fun and I'm glad I have all these great new ideas to make fruit desserts in the winter,
Fruit desserts all year round.
fruit desserts all year round. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.